I want to play for you a riff that he did on freedom that I thought was very interesting, talking about freedom in this election and sort of this is something the Harris campaign is really focused on as a kind of an issue they have the upper hand. That word and what it means, of course, using the Beyonce freedom song at all the campaign rallies. Here's ex-President Barack Obama talking about freedom and what it means. Take a listen.
For Donald Trump and his cronies, freedom means that the powerful can do whatever they please. Fire workers for trying to organize a union, dodge paying their fair share of taxes, try to throw out your votes when they lose an election, control what women can and can't do with their bodies. In other words, for Trump, freedom is getting away with stuff.
I thought that was really a powerful line. A lot of things have been said about Donald Trump over these many years, but that I thought cut to the quick. What do you think, Alexa?
Yeah, and I think it's just reminding people that Trump views himself as someone who is above the fray relative to the average person, which really cuts away at this idea of the faux populism that Trump tries to sell, which is that he's the everyman, just like every other voter who's watching him, which is certainly just not true. And I think Obama not only helps sell that message, but Harris helps sell that message when she's talking about her upbringing and who she is relative to who Donald Trump is. I also don't think it helps that Donald Trump, even though it's not just him, Barron Trump is getting headlines recently, allegedly saying things like, oh, I wasn't fed with a silver spoon, I was fed with a gold spoon. And so I think that people are starting to see this idea of who the Trump family is by way of Barron Trump, Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump, and they really know that they're not just the everyman or this faux populist person that he tries to sell himself to be. Yeah,
there's a lot of sort of populism in that 2012 Obama campaign, Congresswoman. And you saw it again here about things like tax cuts, things like who Donald Trump is looking out for, who Kamala Harris, trying to bring it really back to there's character, there's a sort of character argument and the kind of meat and potatoes argument. Do you think, does that stuff still matter? Like, sometimes I wonder if our politics have gotten so bizarre and insane that the basics of like who is going to benefit you, he's going to raise your taxes on terrorists $4,000, she wants to give you tax breaks, how much that gets through?
I have the same fear. I think that what's happening is that there's so much information, so much disinformation. We have become so accustomed to lies, right? It's the thing that the number one thing that people think about politicians, or that they lie, is that they're dishonest or that they're, hiding one hand. And I think that what the results of that is that people no longer know what to trust when we hear things. So even when you get substantive speeches like this, you start to wonder, well, what, are they just talking, or is someone actually going to come out and do things? So on the one hand, I think that more than the speeches, more than, the rallies, I think that deep down what Americans want to see, they want to go outside. They want to see that when they go to the grocery store, that their groceries are less. They want to be able to buy a house. They want to be able to live comfortably, right? Yep. They want their children to be safe, and they want them to be able to go to schools that are well paid, right? That's what people are looking for, and all they kind of are getting is the bickering. They're getting the absurdity. They're getting the circus. So while it benefits the media, it's really served to make discerning what we want and what we're getting out of politics so much harder for everyday people. And we really have to fight back against that instinct of allowing that to be like the normal in our politics.
Yeah, to that point about sort of the nastiness, I'm not going to play the clip, but Alexi, today Trump was in Detroit and said, if Harris is elected, you want to know the truth, it'll be like Detroit. Our whole country will end up being like Detroit. If she's your president, you're going to have a mess on your hands. Not particularly subtle, but that is basically 100% of that campaign at this point.
He's flailing. I mean, like, his pitch is literally at this point, like, pick the white guy or the black girl. And he's asking people who are the most racist of this country to support him and to actually come out and vote, because that's who he knows he needs to get out to vote in order to win this election. Like, those are his swing voters at the end of the day. And that is what is so alarming about this. And, you know, I thought it was really interesting when former President Obama said basically, like, hey, men, male voters, I don't care if you think that women are weak. You need to reconsider what you think about Kamala Harris and really focus on the facts, because this is not a joke. You know, that's how I interpreted what he was saying to male voters in his speech today, because it is incredibly important, because those are not only the folks who are not only not voting, but if they do go out and vote, they are most likely, according to polls, going to vote for someone like Donald Trump because of mis and disinformation and because of sexism, as we know, with the idea that women are just not as strong as men, as leaders, and this idea that even though Donald Trump is clearly suffering cognitive decline and does not have the mental acuity to be president, he is physically fit to some people, but that is not the same as what it takes to be president. So I think that was very interesting.
Yes, I mean, Barack Obama doing a long riff on sort of men who think that he's an example of strength and how sort of wrongheaded, I think, like preposterous that is. He said those words about Detroit in Detroit, we should note, at the Detroit Economic Club, although I've been to the Detroit Economic Club, I think, and a lot of people driving in from outside of Detroit to go to the Detroit Economic Club. Congresswoman Summer Lee and Alexi McCammon, thank you both. Coming up, the new Republican push for increased government spending, how Donald Trump's own disinformation has thrown his party's priorities completely out of whack. Next.
Or diapers. I remember buying diapers. You think Donald Trump ever changed the diaper? Yeah. I almost said that, but I decided I shouldn't say it.